UNICEF logo. Country offices' annual reports through a disability lens. This video features captions and images of children with and without disabilities from all over the globe.
Hi, my name's Tamara Rusinow, and I work in the disability section here in UNICEF headquarters. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the global review we've done of the country office annual reports this year. Why do we need to do a global level review? Well, in headquarters, we need to be able to tell a story about what we do in disability around the world. We use that with donors, we use that with other PD sections, we also use it with the DOC. Another reason for doing it is that we're trying to look for trends, trying to see how well are we mainstreaming disability across the work that we do in UNICEF. And the third reason is that we use this to help link country offices with similar interests and similar ideas. Country offices that may be working on the same things may have tools and case studies that they'd like to share, and by knowing who's doing what, we're able to make those linkages for the country offices. So how do we go about doing it? There's nothing earth-shattering about it. It's a pretty simple analysis. We use a word search to look for any references to disability across all the country office reports. We then pull that information, the text, into a spreadsheet, and we score every country office that's had that information. And we do that across all the French, the Spanish, and the English versions. The nice thing is that we've been using the same methodology for the last 4 years, exactly the same methodology for 3 years, and generally the same methodology for 4 years. So we're able to look at trends across those years. What's new this year? A number of sections in the country office annual report have actually changed. This year we had one called Case Studies on Equity, and interestingly enough, 27% of the country offices actually mentioned children with disability in that case study. So that gave us some really nice and powerful information, some of those storylines that we really look for. So that was wonderful. One of the things that changed to the negative to some extent is that the country office annual report dropped the section on C4D this year. And in the past, that's been another area where we've been able to get a lot of interesting information from. The other thing that's changed is that this year we have the addition of SMQs. And there's actually 11 that give us information about disability, which is really helpful. It gives us a little bit more quantitative information. A quick caveat. What is it the country office annual reports are not able to do? Well, they are not able to give us information about results and impact. Really, most of what we see there is activity level. So we always have to make that point. We're able to tell you about the activities we do, but not necessarily the impact we're having. We also, as a disability section, do not have PIDB codes. So we can't get information on financial expenditure from there. And last but not least, we're only able to tell you about what's actually in the country office annual reports. If you don't put the information in there, we're not able to talk about it and report on it. If we look now at a graph to see the changes over the last 4 years, you can see there's been a steady increase in the number of country offices that report on disability work from 2010 to 2014. This year, 91 countries, which is 71% of country offices, report on disability work. Now, it's a slight decline from last year. We've seen a slight drop in West Africa and Latin America. In West Africa, that's mainly to do with the Ebola crisis. Country office annual reports have a limited word count, and country offices really had to explain all the changes that they've made in their programming. In Latin America, we think it's more to do with country offices actually not being able to capture all that information in the country office annual report. So sometimes country offices are doing work, but they're not necessarily reporting on it. CIS has been 100% for a while.
And EPRO is
also very close. It's just one country, the Philippines, and they are now looking at doing far more around disability in the coming years. This next graph illustrates how difficult it is to actually get quantitative information from these country office annual reports. This just illustrates it. If you look at C4D, for instance, here, it looks like we've had a huge change from last year, a huge reduction in the number of countries reporting on it. But again, that's because we actually lost that entire section from the country office annual reports. So that's not necessarily a good indicator. Another one, if you look at inclusive education, last year, a huge number of countries reporting on it. This year, far fewer. That's because last year we had a question in the annexes that just looked at whether countries actually had national plans around inclusive education, but it didn't tell us whether they were specific to disability. This year, with the addition of the SMQs, we'll have better information about that. This year, 5 countries have signed up to the CRPD: Vietnam, Madagascar, Swaziland, Comoros, and Kiribati. And in Belarus, although there was a lot of advocacy done, it hasn't yet been ratified. So a number of countries worked very closely on advocacy around the CRPD and then used that as an entry point to do other advocacy on either legislation that was specific to people with disability or else inclusive policies around education. C4D and advocacy work is a major element for country offices throughout CECIS and a number of other countries. And they've been using that to influence policies and legislation, both around people with disability in general or more specific policies such as inclusive education. Now, in the past, a number of countries have used specific entry points for their advocacy. In 2012, the Olympics was a great opportunity for country offices. They either partnered together with the Special Olympics Committee and used it as an opportunity to highlight children with disability in the media and other avenues. Last year, we had the launch of the State of the World Children's Report, which was a wonderful opportunity. And this year, 11 country offices across 5 regions have used the CRC at 25 celebration as an opportunity to highlight the rights and needs of children with disability. Inclusive education is the one area that most country offices across all our regions work on at the moment. And that's a wide span of activities they do around legislation, around policy, around training, capacity building, working with parent groups. And that's true across all 5 regions. Interestingly enough, the work on education often leads to other activities. So countries that have been focusing on education will often move down in age group and start looking at ECD activities. It also allows them to look at deinstitutionalization when you look at special schools, trying to see how we can get children out of institutions and into more inclusive school settings. In terms of other programming areas, the WASH sector has also been doing some interesting work with children with disabilities, mainly through WASH in schools. And this year we've been able to track that also through the SMQs. Only 3 country offices actually reported on their WASH in schools program, whereas last year it was 5, but we know there's a number of other countries that didn't actually put it in their country office annual reports. In health, on the other hand, we didn't find any country offices that talked about trying to improve accessibility to inclusive health services. And a few country offices are still using slightly negative language around the prevention of disability, which is something we need to look out for, particularly in relation to polio campaigns. But for health, we have seen a number of countries through multi-sectoral approaches actually looking at early interventions and detection and trying to link that very closely with ECD activities and deinstitutionalization and social services. So that's where we would see a number of health activities. Social inclusion this year is new to the strategic plan as a separate outcome area. That doesn't mean that country offices haven't been working around social policy and children with disability in the past. But this year we actually need to capture that information in new and different ways. And because it's become a separate outcome area, a number of country offices have thought about how to reconfigure their situation analysis and their CPDs to make sure they include social inclusion with a particular focus on children with disability, which is encouraging for us. And we shouldn't forget some of the amazing work that's been done around advocacy in C4D around social inclusion across a number of regions, particularly in CECIS, the It's About Ability campaign, which started in 2010 and has reached a number of countries. We're trying to highlight that children with disabilities are actually able to do many things, and that's been through the media, through press and print, through schools. And this year in Bosnia they reached over 500,000 people. And the country's been able to document real changes in people's perception and understanding of children with disabilities. In Moldova, for instance, the acceptance of children with disability was just 5% in 2010 and has increased to 36% last year. So real significant changes that have been coming about as part of the social inclusion work that we're doing around children with disabilities. In terms of other program areas, let me give you a quick example from our HIV work. This was actually highlighted as one of the equity case studies this year in the Country Office Annual Report from Guinea-Bissau. The regular HIV prevention work that is normally run through schools encountered a problem with trying to reach children with disabilities, particularly in a school for the deaf in the capital city. When they went to the school, they realized that none of the materials were actually accessible to the children. So the first step they needed to do was actually develop science in consensus with the teachers and the pupils to actually be able to talk about sexual and reproductive health issues. Once they started that, the children became more enthusiastic. They began to work with peer educators, and the children put on a number of plays, both for within their school community and outside. So this is another example of where we need to remember that children with disability are not always being reached by our regular campaigns around reproductive and sexual health issues. In child protection, a number of country offices are doing really important work around the registration of births for children with disabilities, but also around violence issues. And that's a theme that's beginning to come out more also in our humanitarian work. For nutrition, we only see it mentioned very occasionally around children with disability. Sometimes it's to do with preventative work, sometimes it's to do with health. But that so far is not coming out very much in our reports. In terms of trends, what have we been seeing across the regions? Well, one thing is we are seeing a growing number of country offices doing truly integrated multi-sectoral work around children with disabilities. And this is coming about in two different ways. One is country offices that go in with a particular focus around children with disability, and they might start with looking at, well, how do we advocate for their rights around legislation? And then that leads on to looking at deinstitutionalization and perhaps education. The other way it's coming about is where country offices have a more traditional approach to, say, education, and when they begin to look at which groups are most excluded, who have we been missing out on, and identify children with disability, they then begin to work with children with disability through education, and then begin to reach down, say, to other age groups through ECD, perhaps also looking at deinstitutionalization or linking with social services. So those are the two ways that we really see country offices beginning to do much more integrated multi-sectoral work. This year we also had 3 country offices that reported on how they've made their office accessible. And we know a number of other country offices have done that, they just didn't necessarily tell us about it in their report. And with the new executive directive coming out, this will be a focus for many new country offices, and we look forward to hearing about that sort of work that you're doing. With this, I'd like to make a plea that we need to hear as much as we can about the work, the wonderful work country offices are doing with children with disabilities in your country office annual reports. If you need any help or assistance in doing that, please do write to us at the disability section or at disability@unicef.org. Because as we said, we need to be able to tell this story. We need to be able to highlight the wonderful work that you are all doing and celebrate it together.
UNICEF logo. Disability logo.